Hi folks, welcome to Monday's I Write radio podcast stroke videocast. I've got Jimmy Hutton and Stuart Lockhead with me. I'm Norrie Stewart. We've got quite a full plate today. We've got a hatchet piece in the Times. We've got no sign of Boris on the horizon. We've got universal basic income, George Caravan in the National. And we've got new things to look out for. New symptoms for the coronavirus have been highlighted today. So if we're going to start with the Times, I better start with that. This is my hobby horse. As Jimmy pointed out, the author of the article is an ex-Boris Johnson speechwriter. So there's very little doubt about where her sympathies lie. But she's done a complete hatchet job on Nicola Sturgeon, effectively suggesting that, well, her headline is Nicola Sturgeon is pulling the wool over people's eyes. And essentially what she's saying that the whole thing, the whole thrust is just a ploy to get Scotland's independence. While she does say that Nicola Sturgeon is a consummate politician, the underlying message here is Boris isn't a consummate politician in these circumstances. And it's the normal hatchet job. Ian Dale, I think, was on Sky yesterday.
Having a hard time, Norrie, watching these people.
Doing the same thing. Ian Dale has a real thing about Scottish education and brings it up every time. But he then follows it up with the SNP's National Health Service is garbage. I mean, I don't know if he ever compares it to what's happening in England.
No, he doesn't. That would necessitate him having to admit that whilst he thinks the SNP's health service is garbage, by every measure, it is far superior to the NHS in England. And he doesn't want to actually have to point that out to people.
That's what I was going to say. Don't we have our own homegrown uber unionist politician that says the SNP are awfully good at what they're doing? They're doing it deliberately.
George the asshole, yeah.
George is no longer a politician. He's now a lord.
And over the weekend, he must have been. Somebody was telling me there was a report when he had a fight with the police on the street outside his office. I didn't know that had ever happened.
Yeah, he was.
He tweeted some weird stuff over the weekend. He was clearly on the buckfast this weekend.
He likes a wee dram.
Well, can I just ask a simple question, Norrie? So this hatchet job, basically, it was saying she's doing too good a job, so she must be bad.
No, it was the dead cat thing. They simply cannot allow for the fact that Nicola Sturgeon is doing a better job than Boris Johnson. I mean, she's doing a better job than a lot of people, but they cannot allow her to do a better job than Boris Johnson.
I had to wonder myself whether this Claire Foge had actually written the thing, because having a quick look into her background, as you say, she works for Boris Johnson writing speeches. And she's got a master's degree in poetry. So that clearly qualifies her to write a piece about Scottish politics and the role of the First Minister within Scotland during a pandemic. I think we'd all agree, even the most, for most of the Tories, they'd agree that Nicola Sturgeon's doing quite a decent job leading Scotland through this. She's a fabulous administrator. It's interesting to note that just how quickly all your usual suspects were retweeting that story. Your Jackson Carlos and your Bowies and what have you. They were all. It looked almost as if somebody had fed that story to her and then fed to the Scottish Tories, get this retweeted, get it out there. And all, given that Murdoch's turned his back on Boris, I just think it might be. The whole thing might just be a way of Boris getting his foot back in the door with the Times, seeing the Telegraph's turfed him out.
Well, I do think that it's noticeable in the last 7 days, the number of attacks on the SNP have multiplied tenfold. There is a definite campaign out to get Nicola Sturgeon.
Well, Norrie, when we're looking at poll numbers at 53 and 54%, remember, we're not getting the real polls because the politicians would be absolutely horrified if we got the same polling that they got. But it's safe to assume that the Scottish Tories have got polling with SNP sitting about 56, 57, which is a disaster for them. The election for Holyrood's only a year away. And if the SNP poll 52 or anything above, then the Tories are finished. The Tories shrink to probably shrink back to third place as we take the votes that they took from Labour, and Labour will take some of their votes back off the Tories. So Tories finishing third in a Holyrood election would be disastrous for them now.
Yeah, but Jimmy, they can still say no.
They can say no all they want, mate, but things will change. If we have an SNP majority government in Scotland next year, can they say no?
Yes.
They were asked, the only time that's happened before, they had to say yes.
There was a different situation. They had a coalition government, the Lib Dems in Westminster.
I think we're premature with this. There's a very important crunch point coming. And I have to admit, I was a bit disappointed because Sturgeon today at the press conference seemed to back away, because she's now talking about publishing a route map on Thursday, I think she said. If the Treasury in England refuses to continue with furlough payments, and there is good reason for Scotland to continue with a lockdown.
This whole story is a nonsense, Norrie. This whole thing over the weekend was an absolute pile of nonsense. Rishi Sunak has already extended furlough to the end of October. He's not going to change that. And we won't need furlough past October. What we'll need is what he was actually talking about. If you read what he said, he was talking about sectoral assistance for the sectors that cannot open up. And that's we should be having that discussion now.
I mean, she was very clear today. She said she's not in any way ever going to say we'll do the same as England or we'll catch up with England. So that's the wrong narrative, as you well know. However, she did make it clear today that Scotland will move in a similar direction as Wales, Ireland. England's already gone with people, golf courses, garden centres. But what they won't do is send the kids back to primary school, and they won't send teachers in to die, which they're doing in England.
Well, I tell you, I mean, statistically, schools are probably the least dangerous place for coronavirus. But emotively, one kid dies after they've opened schools up.
Yeah, but that's not the point, Norrie. Think about the average family. There's quite a lot of them have got Granny staying with them, or they see Granny every day. Who's going to send their kids to school? The kids bring back the virus and Granny dies. They're not going to send.
Well, I'll tell you who isn't. None of the UK cabinet are, because their kids are all at public school and they're shut till September.
I mean, what is shocking is the threats to teachers. The press are stuck on the front pages. That's appalling.
I think one of the unforeseen consequences of this will be a rise in union membership. I hope so, anyway.
Probably. Well, I think the teachers are fairly well unionised, aren't they?
But I mean, across the board, I think we're going to find that. I don't know what's going on here, guys. I think we're going to find that people start realising that they need unionisation back, which is a problem for the Tories, because that's the last thing they want. Anyway, all that said, you pointed out, Stuart, that George Kerevan had a piece in The National about universal basic income.
Well, George always makes a left-wing case for every issue, and it's usually well argued. And I have to admit, I thought in today's piece in the National, again, it was well argued. If you hadn't thought carefully about UBI, Universal Basic Income, you would have assumed that it was very much a left-wing totem. But it appears, according to George Kerrivan, it's far from it. In fact,
Oh no. I've sent both of you links about this. The libertarians like it, and on the most basic level, they like it because it simplifies everything. They want to take it down the route of everybody gets a universal basic income, but that's all they get. So there's no help with rent or anything. It's a one-off payment.
and so the person that gets the money has then got to buy their health care, buy their education, buy everything.
Well, that's possibly what they would like, but no, that's not quite as extreme as most of the suggested systems. They don't go that far. Basically, they replace welfare. Social Security is replaced with UBI.
If that's where it stopped, it might be okay. But I think the way George Kerrivan was putting it, he didn't think that would be very.
No, it won't be. I mean, if the Tories ever take it on board, it will be a way to privatize everything. That's the way they'll view it. So at that, and George is right, that has to be stopped. It's difficult. I mean, there's as many schemes out there for it as there are people who think about it. But it does. I mean, one of the great things about it is it simplifies everything. But it has to be pitched at a level where it can simplify everything. I was interested to note that one of his worries was that the working class would end up paying for it.
Working class always end up paying
And,
for it.
well, the reality is that most of the systems that I've seen that pay a decent level, say £250, well, if your income's already £250 or £500, say, and you're getting £750, it's a good chance you'll lose most of it in tax.
Did he? Can I just ask? Sorry, Jimmy.
No, on you go, sure.
Did he bring up wealth tax in that article?
Yeah. George is a big advocate of what is essentially land tax. Because you can't move land to the Cayman Islands.
Well, I've been a strong advocate of land tax because, as you say, you can't hide it. It's always there.
Yeah.
It's a very efficient tax to collect. Do you know that they actually, when they first brought in a wealth tax, it was about 1870 and it lasted till about 1910, for about 40 years. And this is why an awful lot of landed estates ended up with the big hooses falling down because the death duties crucified all these owners. 40 years of it.
Again, it's not that simple. A lot of it is about the type of land that you aim the tax at. If you have productive land, i.e. farmland, or, you've got a hydroelectric scheme on your land, you don't get taxed on it.
If you had a factory on it?
Yeah, because it's a benefit to society, and that business, whatever, is paying tax anyway. It's basically where you have grouse moor. I would imagine they would have to think about tax relief on people who plant forests, things like that.
That's a motive for us in Scotland, but generally speaking, across the whole of the UK, that's really not where the big tax collection would come on land. It would be Mayfair and places like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the ground rent is what it's kind of aimed at, but it is also aimed at forcing landowners to actually utilize the land for the benefit of the community.
I've just had a memory suddenly. You might remember this, Norrie. Back in the 70s, when income tax was very high, I think it was about 45%. And what happened during that period was the wealthy switched whatever they were doing from anything that attracted income tax into something that would get, that's when the property bubble really started, because if you added value to anything property, if it was an added value, then you were only taxed at 30%.
Well,
Party.
the sort of modern equivalent of that is when people take their pay in dividends. And one of the unforeseen circumstances of the furlough is it's based on what you pay in tax. So if you take a dividend, it's not caught in the Chancellor's furlough scheme. So if you've been avoiding tax, because dividend, I think, is taxed at about 10%, it's certainly a lower tax rate than taking a wage out of a business, you don't benefit from furlough, which feeds into the question of, if you hide your money in the Caymans, why should you get support from the government, Virgin Air, etc. Jimmy?
I was just going to say on that note, and see that Patrick Harvey's got something coming up in Parliament about the government schemes and whether people who avoid tax should benefit from them. But how on earth Patrick Harvey is going to define tax avoidance to fit his wee scheme, I've no idea, because there's no Western government that actually defines tax avoidance in a way that the people would recognise, is there?
Well, that, strangely enough, brings us back full circle to UBI. Because had you given every worker in the land, 250 quid a week or whatever, well, it would have been nearer 500 if you compare it to the furlough scheme. You wouldn't have to pay companies this money. So you wouldn't be arguing. And it gets over that problem. My problem with being out and out against giving Virgin Air, for instance, any sort of tax break or grant money, what's he looking for, 500 million, is that everybody that works for Virgin Air that lives in the UK pays tax and VAT and all the rest of it. So all the employees who would also suffer if they all get paid off are paying their taxes. It's just the company that isn't. So there is an argument to say bail the company out to protect the employees.
But the people like Jim Radcliffe, who used to be the richest man in Britain until he moved to Monaco, the guy who owns Grangemouth and other things, that's what he holds. It's like blackmail. That's the threat he holds over the Scottish government. That if you don't do what I'd want you to do, I'll shut down Grangemouth and 10,000 people will lose their jobs, well-paid jobs.
I would like to see a situation where a government could basically turn around to people who do that and say, yeah, and we'll take it off you and run it as a nationalised industry.
At the moment, the Scottish government hasn't the power to do that, of course.
It hasn't, but that would be a situation I would like to see develop.
I agree with you.
Where essentially you can say, okay, fine, shut it down. But the minute you go public and you send out the redundancy notices or whatever, we are taking control of that industry. And especially Grangemouth, which is integral to the Scottish economy.
Absolutely.
There should be a mechanism whereby the government can take it over. That simple. We exhausted that one, guys. Okay. Now, I want you all to breathe through your nose, sniff the air. Well, maybe not. Because if you can't smell anything, guys, you might have coronavirus. Jimmy.
Aye. I'm a bit concerned as to why they've suddenly decided to whack that into the ether today, given that it's been doing the rounds for weeks. I'm not quite sure what the thinking is behind that.
Is it not just that it's become, well, did somebody not say when we were discussing what we were going to discuss that it's a more reliable indicator as a symptom than coughing and so on.
Yes, somebody did come out and say that again this morning. I'm wondering, this is coming for London, and I'm wondering if Sage are completely tied up in knots now, because the scientific advice from London, the scientific input into the London press conferences, for example, is getting to the stage where it's laughable. That chief scientific officer down there, and the deputy chief scientific officer, and the medical officer, and that, they are politicians. They have completely been subsumed by the political narrative that runs through that 5 o'clock press conference from London. And I worry that Sage has been consumed as well. Because this, as I say, this advice has been out there for weeks. People have been talking about it. And suddenly it's become government advice rather than anecdotal discussion. And I do wonder just how accurate this is, because as far as I'm aware, the likes of New York, Germany, they've mentioned this, but they never ever made it official advice.
Well, apparently, according to the guy in charge of, there is what's his name? Spectre is his second name. Dr. Spectre at King's College London. That runs
Never trust anybody with that surname, eh?
He was interviewed at some length. It was a candid interview by the newsreader this morning about 10 or 11 o'clock, about 10:30, just a BBC newsreader. I forget her name, but it was very candid. It was obviously clear, and she was given some notes, but it was very good. He was very persuasive. He said that in the US, they're already working from 7 symptoms over there. But can I just make the general point that I think that what we really need to try and identify a list of things that they're doing everywhere else, but not in this country. I've never seen a bit of film yet of anywhere in this country getting fumigated by a guy in a fucking bodysuit, you know, a hazard suit, fumigating the tube or something. This seems to happen all over the world. That's just an example. I'd like us to look at just what are they not doing in this country they're doing everywhere else.
Well, I don't know if that's more effective than washing down with soap and water. I don't know enough about it.
I'm not specifically thinking about that, but I'm worried about what we are not doing in this country that they are doing everywhere else. We don't even know. We don't have a list of that.
The most important one being cutting down on the number of people dying and cutting down on the number of daily new infections. Our number of new daily infections is still stubbornly at about 3,500. Everywhere else on the planet is going down.
Well, everybody getting on these tube trains, all these people flying into Heathrow and not getting tested. I mean, there's a list that goes on and on and on that I don't think they do everywhere else.
One of the graphs that they show at their daily Downing Street press conference is the number of infections per 100,000, I think it is, in the UK home countries. Scotland's still at the bottom of that. They're still the best. And everybody, as I say, mate, seems to ignore it.
I worry that Sage has been totally ruined by
it's an awful lot of people.
The political input in there.
The fact
that they won't publish their advice. They refuse to publish their advice, and they refuse to let their peers review it in any way, shape, or form. So that means it's political advice, or they would publish it.
I do get the impression of the people they put up in front of the cameras at Downing Street that they have a narrative to follow.
Aye.
Let's be kind to them. That they have a narrative to follow, and it's noticeably different from the way questions are answered at Holyrood.
Well, mind, we've not got Rasputin kicking people's arses in the background before they go on. You're guaranteed we Rasputin Dominic sitting there behind that big double door that they'll walk through, wagging a finger at them before they come on. Don't you dare say anything that's off script.
I'm sure I heard Sturgeon say that the minutes of our Sage equivalent are published. Did anybody else catch that? That was last week.
People have been asking for it. I don't know if it's published yet. I think she's getting round to publishing it, but I don't know that it's actually out there yet.
Because the question was, why won't you publish the advice?
Mm.
And I'm sure she said the minutes of these meetings are already published on the government website.
Right. I have to have a look.
We've got a big day coming on Thursday, judging by watching today's briefing. When Wednesday, of course, they publish the weekly extra deaths and extra information. And she flagged up that on Thursday she'd be laying out how they were going to ease the restrictions here in the lockdown in Scotland. So I wouldn't be surprised anything like that. It's going to be a big reveal on Thursday, so we can look forward to that this week.
I don't think there's going to be anything revealed. I think she's bloody told us what's going to be talked about, and it's going to be similar to England. I mean, why on earth are people so desperate to get into a bloody garden centre and dump their bloody recyclable waste? How middle class has this country become that that's the kind of things people are worried about? Whether they can recycle, whether they can buy plants, whether they can play fucking golf or tennis. People are dying. Why is it important if you can go and play tennis or not? What's important is getting this infection rate down in hospitals and in care homes, because we've managed to get it down in the community to the point where it's almost negligible.
Okay, Jimmy.
No, I mean, seriously, mate, the community transmission isn't talked about at all. It's it's less than 0.25% in the Lothians, because the transmission rate throughout the Lothians is 0.26, and that includes care homes where it's still running rife.
But that's nothing to do with government, or in fact us. That's all about headlines for newspapers. And the headline at the moment is care homes.
Well, when you get newspaper headlines being fed to them by Conservative Central Office, when you get somebody like Jackson Carlaw actually being handed a platform to lie by Gordon Brewer. I watched again Gordon Brewer's performances yesterday, and to be honest with you, mate, I'm beginning to worry about that man. I think he's got skin in the game. I think he's got somebody that's ill, or he's worried about somebody in a care home, because he lied consistently yesterday. 3 times he said on that programme that the Guy for Care Scotland had said that the updated rules for testing in care homes were wrong-headed. And the guy never said that. He tried to insist that make the guy say it during the interview. The guy wouldn't say it, and Brewer came out and said it anyway. What happened to the BBC being unbiased?
No, that was a memorable interview. He really pressed that Donald McCaskill. They thought that McCaskill would reveal things that he wanted to, that guy McCaskill. I think McCaskill must have some guarantees from the Scottish government, and he's staying stum. Whatever he's staying stum.
Care Scotland are kind of getting everything that they ask for at the moment for the Scottish government. I mean, you've got yesterday, Jackson Carlaw suddenly pushing, and it's only on Saturday, I think he even mentioned it, but pushing for 100% testing in care homes. And he said that's already on offer in England. It is already on offer in England and Wales, Jackson, but they're about as close to it as Hearts are to European football. They're nowhere near delivering. They've just, in the usual Tory way, they've said that it's on offer, but they're nowhere near delivering it, and they'll probably never will deliver it. But now that they've said it, the press have merrily gone on their way and reported that it's available.
That was an interesting thing that I picked up on today from Sturgeon, was that the easing of the lockdown had to coincide with the ability to test. And it was about 2 weeks away, because she's been promising these 2,000 test people at the end of the month.
600 started today, this morning, and in 3 health board areas, presumably the other 1,400 will be up and running in the 2 weeks that in the time span that they promised in the first place.
Aye, and the point I'm making though is she explained what nobody in the Downing Street presses has ever thought to explain, That is, you can't do one successfully without doing the other.
Aye,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You know,
said, added on to that, which I
Support.
know, which was different from everybody else, the system that they're building can be reversed easily. In other words, if things go wrong, if the R rate goes up, it can be simply reversed.
Yeah, but she also went into the point. I think the health secretary went into it as well, where Scotland has added support to this test, track, and isolate thing, because the people that are isolating will need support.
yeah.
They'll need, if they've got to isolate for a period of 14 days, they're going to need 14 days wages. And if 3 weeks down the line they've got to isolate again because somebody else that they've come in contact with.
She was asked about that, wasn't she? And she said,
Aye.
yes, they are looking to cover people's.
Exactly. The system's going to be in place, which is not in place in London. It's not in place in England at all. They're not even spoken about it. So all these people that at the moment are actually working in care homes or they're working in hospitals, where are they going to get their dough?
I'll tell you the other thing that isn't being talked about, but will, I think, as we ease out of this, the independence community are going to start asking questions. Is this actually all about London? Because there are part of the northeast of England has a high R rate, and it all looks like it's timing according to what's happening in London, not what's happening in the whole UK.
We spoke about that at the start, Norrie, when we went into lockdown. We spoke about it being very much a London-centric decision. And certainly coming out of lockdown has been completely London-centric. When you've got people like Andy Burnham and the Mayor of Gateshead and the Mayor of Liverpool just screaming out that they do not consider that the science that London is using applies to them because their numbers are completely different. They can see that. And I mean, the Mayor of Manchester, the Mayor of Liverpool, these guys have got considerable civic powers to operate in a different way. Fair play, they've also got a level of political reason to stand up against Boris Johnson. But I'd imagine that they've got considerable public support because any polling that's been done in England certainly suggests that people are not comfortable with the pace that London is moving at.
High 60s. High 60s on the polling. Anyway, guys, Stuart, you got anything you'd like to finish with?
Yes, I have actually. You and I, of course, have a personal experience with Ofcom, the regulator of radio and television in this country. Ofcom today said that they sanctioned a television channel called Love World in this country, which broadcasts news and a sermon completely against Ofcom rules, claiming that 5G was the cause of the pandemic and that this was subject of a global cover-up, and also that whatever that hydrochlorine,
that one,
one that Trump said was you can take would cure you of the virus.
That can in fact kill you.
Yes. So they've been severely sanctioned. They've got further sanctions to come. They're a Christian religious channel, apparently.
Probably backed with American money.
Yeah, almost certainly.
More
just
likely, aye.
Subscription. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're taken off the air because judging by you and I know how tough Ofcom can be at times. We'll see how they go on. They could be taken off the air.
I'm a supporter of free speech. They should be allowed to continue to make fools of themselves.
I agree with that.
Write a reply and all that. I'm not actually sure about a radio station that is totally autonomous. That's a different kettle of fish to doing it online where people can give different opinions. If you control the opinion, you
But this is a licensed TV station, presumably.
Yeah, that's
Sky or somewhere, I don't know.
Anyway, Jimmy, you got anything you want to finish with?
Nah. Yes, give us a giggle, Norrie.
Right, okay. What I've got to finish with, guys, is basically the under 5 equivalent of the laughing policeman, if you all remember that. And this is two kids with a bottle of Lucozade having great fun. Those of you that can't see it, you'll find it online somewhere, possibly under the Lucozade twins, I don't know. So we're going to finish with that, guys. We won't be coming back after this. We'll just go out with this, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks, Stuart. And I'm Nori.
Hello.
Cheers for now. Oh. Here we go. I'll just let this run.
You put it all over your face. Me have a drink now.
What do you actually think their mother put in that bottle?
Out you, Buckfast.
I reckon it's Bucky.
Buckfast and Lucozade would work for me.
I have to admit, I thought it was Iron Brew when I first saw it. That is a tenement back green, isn't it?
Aye.
Imagine that being out in blood.
We'll call it a day at that, guys. Cheers for now. Bye-bye.